You thought you knew these famous names. But what if their most important story was never on stage, never on screen, and never in the headlines, hidden behind years of success, applause, and public admiration? Some celebrities spent a long time fighting a private battle just to live as their true selves. Plenty of people assume they understand transgender journeys, yet few recognize what it can cost to choose authenticity later in life. Today, we're uncovering the turning points that changed everything and why those stories still matter. Hunter Schafer. Hunter Schafer is more than a breakout star. She's a creative voice whose life moved through small places, big laws, and a spotlight that arrived fast and stayed. Hunter was born in Trenton, New Jersey, and grew up around Raleigh, North Carolina, in a family rooted in church life. From the outside, it looked like a normal Southern upbringing with clear expectations. Privately, her sense of self didn't match what the world assumed, and that mismatch can feel loud when your community is quiet about it. Hunter began transitioning during her first year of high school, at an age when most teens are still trying to figure out who they are. Period. Art became an early refuge, drawing, fashion, and any space where expression felt safer than explanation. Then the outside world caught up. At the University of North Carolina School of the Arts in Winston-Salem, she was living in a women's dorm when North Carolina passed HB 2, a law that targeted where transgender people could use restrooms in public buildings. In 2016, Hunter became one of the plaintiffs in a federal lawsuit challenging that law, turning a personal life into a public stand, not for attention, but for basic dignity. After graduating in 2017, she moved to New York, signed with Elite Model Management, and stepped deeper into creative work. By 2019, millions met her as Jules on HBO's Euphoria, a character portrayed with vulnerability instead of a punchline. Hunter's path shows how visibility can begin in a courtroom and end up on a screen, and how, for some people, being seen is both the risk and the relief. Caitlyn Jenner. Caitlyn Jenner's story is often told in headlines, but it started in silence. For much of her life, she lived in two separate worlds. To the public, she was Bruce Jenner, the Olympic champion whose gold medal victory at the 1976 Montreal Games made her a national hero. Privately, she carried a lifelong struggle with gender identity, one that began quietly in childhood and stretched across decades. From a young age, Bruce felt a persistent sense that something didn't align inside. Those feelings were confusing and isolating, especially in an era when gender identity was rarely discussed and often misunderstood. With no real language or support to explain what she was experiencing, she pushed the emotions down and leaned hard into athletics. Discipline became a shield. Achievement became a way to cope. But as the years passed, success, fame, and family life couldn't silence the inner conflict. Multiple marriages and public recognition still didn't bring lasting peace. Even when she tried to share these feelings with people closest to her, fear of rejection and misunderstanding often drove her back into isolation. This wasn't about reinvention. It was about survival and honesty. And only later in life, after years of reflection, did she find the courage to acknowledge her truth. At 65, she decided to transition and publicly became Caitlyn Jenner in 2015. Her Vanity Fair cover, titled "Call Me Caitlyn," marked the end of a long private journey and the start of a new chapter. Her transition wasn't sudden. It was the result of a lifetime of endurance. Caitlyn's story stands as a reminder that self-acceptance takes courage and that it's never too late to live authentically. Laverne Cox. Laverne Cox is a cultural and artistic icon, one of the voices that helped reshape modern conversations about gender. Long before she became a celebrated actress and advocate, her life was marked by self-discovery, hardship, and quiet determination. Born and raised in Alabama, Laverne sensed early on that her inner identity didn't fit society's expectations. Growing up in a conservative, deeply religious environment, she struggled to reconcile who she felt she was with messages that framed those feelings as wrong. As a teenager, her femininity made her a target for bullying, deepening an isolation that followed her into early adulthood. But she found refuge in art, especially dance places where movement could say what words couldn't. Even when people discouraged interests labeled feminine, she kept reaching for creative spaces that made her feel briefly whole. The emotional toll of hiding herself led to a deep personal crisis, and yet it became a turning point rather than an ending. Searching for freedom and authenticity, Laverne moved to New York City and began living openly, embracing her transition with more clarity and confidence. Her breakthrough role as Sophia Bursed on Orange is the New Black introduced millions to a transgender character portrayed with dignity, complexity, and humanity. Through visibility, advocacy, and art, she transformed personal struggle into cultural progress. Her message, often summed up as "trans is beautiful," continues to insist that self-acceptance is possible and powerful, even when prejudice has been loud for a long time. Jazz Jennings. Jazz Jennings represents a different chapter in public understanding. One shaped not by a late-life revelation, but by early awareness and consistent support. From a very young age, Jazz expressed a clear, unwavering sense of who she was. Long before she had the words, she knew she was a girl, even when others saw her differently. At just 6 years old, Jazz spoke publicly about her identity in a national television interview with Barbara Walters, becoming one of the youngest transgender children to do so. Her certainty was striking. She gravitated naturally toward traditionally feminine clothing and interests, and when people addressed her incorrectly, she calmly but firmly corrected them. That consistency left little doubt about the depth of her self-understanding. What set Jazz apart, though, was the unconditional support of her family. Instead of denying or suppressing her identity, her parents chose acceptance, allowing Jazz to grow up surrounded by love and affirmation. That foundation mattered as she navigated school, friendships, and the pressure of being publicly visible while still a kid. Her life later became the focus of TLC's I Am Jazz, giving viewers an intimate look at the emotional and social challenges of growing up transgender through television, social media, and advocacy work. Jazz became a spokesperson for transgender youth, earning recognition as one of the most influential teens of her generation. Jazz's story isn't only about transition, it's about identity affirmed early, resilience nurtured at home, and the power of young voices to expand what society understands. Patricio Manuel. Patricio Manuel's journey sits at the intersection of identity and a sport built on rigid tradition. Born in Santa Monica and raised in the Los Angeles area, boxing wasn't just something he tried, it became the structure of his life, the place where discipline felt familiar and strength felt measurable. He built an impressive amateur career, winning national titles and climbing toward the Olympic dream. But on February 14, 2012, he withdrew from U.S. Olympic trials with a serious shoulder injury. The setback wasn't only physical. In the long recovery, the questions he had been carrying for years grew harder to ignore. In 2013, Patricio began hormone therapy. In 2014, he had top surgery in Salt Lake City, Utah, milestones that brought his body closer to his identity. Yet even then, acceptance wasn't automatic. In one gym, he was allowed to train only if no one found out, a condition that turned a supposed safe space into another kind of closet. He left and kept looking. By 2016, Patricio was fighting for the right to compete as himself, working through the licensing process to box professionally as a man. And on December 8, 2018, in Indio, California at Fantasy Springs, he made history in his pro debut, winning by unanimous decision. Recognition followed, brand partnerships, speaking events, and a wider platform, but the pressure didn't disappear. His story proves that in sports, the toughest rounds aren't always in the ring. Sometimes they're in the rules, the locker rooms, and the stairs you have to survive just to step forward. Andrea Pečić. Andrea Pečić broke boundaries in fashion long before the world knew her by that name. As Andrea Pečić, she became famous for a striking, unconventional look that blurred the line between menswear and womenswear, walking both worlds with the same poise. Behind the images, though, was a deeper conflict. Born in Bosnia and later raised in Australia after fleeing war, she grew up navigating identity in places that didn't leave much room for ambiguity. From a young age, she felt drawn to femininity, an instinct that brought comfort, but also confusion and shame when society demanded clear definitions. As a teenager, her increasingly androgynous appearance made her a target for bullying and social isolation. Fashion became both refuge and language, a space where difference could be valued instead of punished. But professional success couldn't solve the personal truth she carried. She didn't see herself as male. In 2014, after careful psychological and physical preparation, Andrea decided to transition. She later described it not as a sudden change, but as a necessary step toward inner peace. And rather than ending her career, the transition allowed it to evolve. With renewed clarity, she returned to modeling. In 2015, she made history as the first openly transgender model to appear on the cover of GQ Portugal. Her journey stands as proof that authenticity can be powerful, even in an industry and a world that doesn't always welcome it. Chaz Bono. Chaz Bono's story is about stepping out of a famous shadow and finding a self that finally fit. When entertainers Sonny and Cher welcomed their child Chastity in 1969, few could have imagined the deeply personal journey ahead. Raised in the public eye, Chastity grew up surrounded by fame and expectation, yet privately struggled with a sense that the identity assigned at birth didn't reflect who he truly was. From early childhood, he felt disconnected from being perceived as female. Those feelings intensified over time, creating years of emotional conflict lived quietly, mostly away from cameras. For decades, he tried to meet family and social expectations while suppressing his own truth, a weight that became harder to carry with every passing year. In the late 2000s, after extensive self-reflection, he chose to transition and began living openly as Chaz Bono. At 40, he underwent hormone therapy and chest reconstruction surgery changes that helped align his physical appearance with his inner identity. This process wasn't about reinvention, it was about reconciliation, becoming whole. His transition also reshaped his public role. Chaz became a thoughtful advocate for transgender visibility and LGBTQ+ rights, speaking candidly about identity, acceptance, and growth. He later moved into acting, becoming one of the first openly transgender men to play a male lead in a feature film. Cher has acknowledged that acceptance took time, but today, her love and pride underline a broader truth. Understanding can evolve, and family bonds can endure. Carmen Carrera. Carmen Carrera's journey shows what happens when the public thinks it knows your story and gets it wrong. She first came to attention on RuPaul's Drag Race, where her beauty and stage presence made her memorable. At the time, many people saw her only as a performer, a character built for reality television, not a woman fighting to be recognized as herself. As Carmen began her transition from male to female, a new obstacle appeared. The media and audiences kept framing her through the lens of drag, blurring the line between performance and identity. For Carmen, that misunderstanding was one of the most painful parts of the process, because it reduced her life to an act. Determined to live authentically, she spoke up about respectful language and accurate representation of transgender women in media. Sometimes her willingness to challenge harmful terminology sparked controversy even within LGBTQ+ spaces. But Carmen held her ground, insisting that visibility without dignity isn't progress. Instead of retreating, she used criticism as fuel. Over time, she established herself as a successful fashion model and a consistent voice for transgender awareness. Her advocacy focused on normalization, pushing society to see transgender people as individuals, not spectacle. Carmen's path reflects a wider evolution from entertainment to empowerment. Through resilience and honesty, she turned public attention into a platform for change, proof that personal truth can become a catalyst for social progress. Thanks for watching Hollywood Law Secrets. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and hit the bell for more untold stories.